I have the pleasure to welcome in ELIAMEP series of podcasts Dr. Swasti Rao. She's an associate professor and associate dean in the global initiatives and the Jindal Global University in India. Professor is also going to join us in the fifth ELIAMEP American College of Greece Summer Academy that will take place in a few days' time. Professor Rao, thank you so much for joining us in this discussion in our podcast series. And I want to start our discussion by talking a little bit about India. India has taken a more prominent role on the global stage in recent years, from
Right.
G20 to regional diplomacy. How do you see India positioning itself in this shifting world order?
So thank you so much for the opportunity, and I'm really looking forward to coming to your summer school in a few days. And thanks for having me on the podcast as well. And I think it's a very good time. So I must congratulate you also for having this timely podcast on India and India's role in the world, which is a very, very shifting world order right now. So as you rightly said, that India's foreign policy could be a bit of a challenge for many countries in Europe to understand because, typically in Europe, you are very used to having like a transatlantic alliance or the European Union, and your foreign policy and your security policy is largely embedded into these frameworks. However, as you may be noticing, that Russia's war in Ukraine and all the other challenges that you face today with respect to Donald Trump in office, that has also necessitated a change in your foreign policy. Similarly, I think it is right now the right time to have a conversation on India. India, as you know, for many decades had a foreign policy of non-alignment because we had a colonial legacy. So as a post-colonial state, we thought that the best way to engage with the new world, and especially a world which was divided into power blocks during Cold War, was to have a non-aligned foreign policy. But at the same time, our security challenges, because we had a disturbed border, disputed border, and especially the problem of Kashmir with Pakistan, and then we have the problem of different sectors along our border with China. So these security challenges also necessitated that India should have a more pragmatic view. And over the years, of course, notwithstanding the fact that the world order changed, Cold War, and all that ended, India's foreign policy has now shifted from non-alignment to a more active multi-alignment. And India, of course, is in Asia, as you know, in South Asia particularly. India is one of the leading economies. Today, India is world's fourth largest economy. And very soon it is said that India could be world's third largest economy. We are 1.5 billion people. We hold a very important place in terms of our geography in the Indian Ocean region and the larger Indo-Pacific. We are also a young country. India's demography is such that we are a young country. So in so many ways, and probably the last point would be that India's rise has not been destabilizing. If you try to understand that in contrast to how China's rise has been, which has been extremely destabilizing with respect to South China Sea and the Taiwan Straits and Indo-Pacific, etc. India perhaps is the only country that you can see in the last 60, 70 years whose rise has not been destabilizing. So putting all of that together, today India is looking at, as in terms of a pole in itself, India pushes for a multipolar world order. India has security challenges, but India tries to, get into internal reforms and get into active strategic partnerships and comprehensive strategic partnerships with many countries of the world in order to address its security challenges. So today, I think the tool with which you can understand India's foreign policy flavor is a active multi-alignment that believes into building collaborative frameworks instead of building alliances. So we do not believe in zero-sum games, but that commitment is very, very obvious when you talk about India today.
Well, and if you could talk about the foreign policy priorities regarding also the global south, also China, and of course, the United States, and the United States of Donald Trump, which is something different than we knew before he was elected president.
Sure. So there are certain principles, that India has always abided by, and these kind of foreign policy imperatives or these kind of foreign policy commitments actually go in a long way into how it has shaped our worldview. So one of the things is that in Pan-Asianism and South-South dialogue has been two fundamental pillars of how India looks at itself in the world. This has been there for many, many years. I mean, ever since we got independent, Pan-Asianism and South-South cooperation was looked upon as a very important pillar of India's foreign policy. What has happened over the years and over the decades is that that has also evolved and changed. So today, India believes in being the voice of the global South. The bit of a problem out there is that while India has immense reputational advantage, that the countries of the global South really sort of trust India's voice and, trust India's position in the world, trust India's rise in the world, which has been very, very all encompassing. It has not come at the cost of somebody else, okay? While they respect us for that, while they respect us for being such a responsible global power, but at the same time, we do not come with deep pockets such as China does. So you will see that in the prevailing circumstances of the countries that are loosely termed as global South, you could call them developing economies, India brings reputational advantage and India tries to be a member of the groupings which are popular with the global South. And therefore, you see, which I find difficult to explain to many Europeans and Western partners, is that how can India be a part of the Quad and how can India be a part of the BRICS? But India is a part of these diverse groupings because you will see a lot of developing economies being a part of them too. And if we are not there, then those groupings run the risk of being completely dominated by China. And you know that China has a particular way of its economic statecraft, which may not be healthy in the long term because it can lead to debt trap and it can lead to, a different kind of a domination of those countries. So India is pretty much committed to being the voice of the global South. India has always upheld, issues that are very critical for the global South. So for example, if you look at the quota system within the IMF, whether you look at, raising the voice for reforming the United Nations Security Council, whether it's been about, vaccine diplomacy, whichever platform you can think of, India has always tried to bring more inclusivity to the global South. In fact, one of the best examples that comes to my mind right now is that while we were chairing the presidency of the G20, the entire African Union, along with 54 African countries, were made member to the G20. And that has only happened because India has actively sort of pushed for these agendas. And wherever India is not a member of the G7, but India is always invited to the G7. India is very much a member of the G20. And all these platforms, you will see that India always upholds the concerns of the global South, trying to sort of talk about how the global crises and the food crisis, the fuel crisis, the fertilizer crisis, which is perpetuated by the unending wars, are impacting countries that are most vulnerable. So in that sense, India is there. But like I said, the challenge is that there is also another country, China, which comes with deep pockets and, a different kind of loans, which are not really contingent upon any kind of human rights or any kind of democratic values. And then we see that these countries also sort of fall into that, loan that China sort of offers. So India and China, you could say, compete for the leadership of the global South. We bring something else on the table, and China, of course, brings something else on the table. And just one thing that basically there is a very important link between how India looks at its endeavors and engagements with the global South, because the best way that India can do it is by actually joining hands with the Western partners in a framework which is referred to as triangular cooperation, where India and France can come together for, certain projects in the Pacific Island countries or in Africa. Similarly, India has been doing that with Germany. India is now doing that with countries like the UAE, so on and so forth. So that is how India looks at global South. It is a collaborative, inclusive concept for us, and it is very much a part of our foreign policy. Over the last many decades, it has evolved because the world order has evolved, but India is very much there. And I think it also somewhere explains why a lot of people find it difficult to understand why is India a member of such diverse groupings, but actually the answer lies there.
Professor, I want to ask you also about the relationship between India and the European Union and the
Yeah,
European countries. You mentioned a lot in our discussion that you try to make Europeans understand India, and sometimes you find it very difficult. And I want you to elaborate on that and how could the relationship between the European countries and also between Greece and India, which we see we have
sure.
a long history in our relationship, but I think that now we're getting even closer.
Yeah. So let's try to take it into two parts. One, let's try to first understand India and Europe ties, the European Union ties, and then we come to more bilateral issues like India and Greece, which in my opinion is a wonderful strategic partnership and a lot of potential lies unexplored, frankly. In my opinion, I've been doing a lot of work on Greece. So first about India and the EU. See, for the longest time, India only engaged with the European Union and European countries, basically as a developmental partner. Okay, this is for the EU as a whole, right? And when it came to bilateral relationship, India for the longest time has been only focusing on the big four, which is UK, France, Germany, and Russia. Okay. Now this has happened obviously because of certain historical reasons. Okay, this has happened for the simple reason that also within Europe, you had France and Germany kind of dominated the agenda, and with the UK, we obviously had very old ties. I mean, of course, we were colonies of the British. So because and Russia, of course, is again having a unique position in our strategic planning because of our Cold War legacy. Because it was in 1971 when Soviet Union actually we signed a treaty with Soviet Union. We had a very big war with Pakistan that actually liberated a country called Bangladesh. So if you are aware of the South Asian security dynamics, I think then you have a fair understanding of why India has been focused on the big four, particularly France again comes with a very, very unique, I would say, historical relationship with India because France is perhaps the only country that has always gone against its Western partners and not really joined the sanction regime against India. First in 1974, when we tested our nuclear weapons, and later in 1998, when we actually, first 1974, we tested the nuclear technology, and in 98, we had a nuclear weapon. And both these times, when the collective West in entire G7 put us under sanctions, France was the only country that went against its own alliance and went ahead and sort of completed all the promises it has. So France also has a very unique position. Germany, of course, because it's the biggest economy in Europe, and Germany has a long list of, I would say, culture of Indologists, and that also makes Germany important. But again, coming to the main thing, it is true that for the longest time, when we talk about Europe as a continent, Europe has never been able to really capture India's strategic imagination, not at least until 2 years, 3 years ago. But all of that, like I said, that it was mostly to do with development, it was mostly to do with connectivity, mostly to do with sort of developing our metros. And, the European Development Bank has been very active in India. But European Union, was never really looked upon as a strategic actor. And I think the reasons are very clear because it never projected itself as a strategic actor, right? European Union projected itself as a geo-economic bloc. And the biggest opportunities that we saw with Europe on the whole was about trade and services, etc. All of that changed with the Russia's war in Ukraine because that kind of put the European continent in an existential crisis, and especially after when Donald Trump came and sort of, we also started to see that how changed his views are on the transatlantic alliance. And we often refer to it as the Trump pill. So Trump really forced the Trump pill down Europe's throat, and Europe had to take matters in its own hand. So coming and just connecting it back to India a little bit, because before I was I became an associate professor for 3 years. I was working at the Ministry of Defense think tank, and I was specializing on the European continent. So that's how I sort of really understand the European security dynamics so well, and also the Indian strategic thinking on that. So for the longest time, the idea here was that Europe is not divided. Europe is not meant to sort of handle a war on its continent, and Europe cannot support Ukraine if America pulls out. Okay, so that was how it was projected. But I think a lot of things have changed in the last few years. And very quickly, if you ask me today, there are two, three main parameters of where India-Europe relationship are going. First is that both bilaterally, India is deepening ties with specific partners in Europe. Today, Europe is very, very important. European countries are very important for us to diversify away our arms dependence on Russia, which we have been trying to do for a long time, because we also understand that over reliance comes with its own costs, and over reliance comes with its own risks. So we have been trying for the long time within the Ministry of Defense to come up with, updated defense acquisition procedure guidelines to try and diversify our arms, partners, and also sort of focus more on co-building and co-producing, etc. So in that regard, I mean, today, France, of course, is the most preeminent European partner with whom we have a very extensive defense industrial roadmap. We also have great defense industry ties with UK. Germany has backed the biggest strategic partnership model for making conventional air independent propulsion submarines for India. Similarly, Sweden's Saab has made history by becoming the first ever foreign company getting 100% FDI, which is, according to the current guidelines, it is capped. Okay, it is capped at about 70% or so. But Sweden Saab became the first ever country to actually get a waiver and get 100% FDI in defense sector. Similarly, with all these countries, Spain, we got our medium transport aircraft from Spain. Now with Greece, of course, we are thinking we have a defense cooperation. Our Air Force chief was in Greece just last week, and we talked so much about how we can build on defense cooperation. So it's not just a defense industry cooperation, it is also military to military ties like joint exercises, etc. Because so many European countries are now getting more and more engaged with Indo-Pacific. So of course, India has a very important role in the Indo-Pacific. So long and short is that I have done a lot of work, and my argument is consistently for the last 2 years is that India has stakes in Europe's security and military modernization. Europe has an immense task to sort of modernize its military preparedness. And I do see that Europeans cannot do it all by themselves, because you're also supporting Ukraine and you're modernizing yourself. And if you look at the current 5%, which is really very, very ambitious at the NATO summit. So I think India has stakes there, because I do see that in the last 2 years alone, India's defense ties, both the defense ties per se in terms of cooperation and defense industry ties, have grown remarkably with Europe. Europe also has now projected itself as a more stable partner compared to United States, because Donald Trump has really sort of upended a lot of strategic calculations that India earlier had. So whether it is, for the longest time, in the West, US has been our biggest strategic partner. But with Donald Trump and with his very wavered ways of, putting tariffs, and with his very wavered ways of actually pushing allies and partners to the brink, I think Europe actually has emerged as a very stable partner. India now, in the last, 2-3 years, has been engaging with countries which go beyond the big four. And that is, the rise of Greece, the rise of Poland, the rise of, India's engagement with Balkans, India's engagement with Caucasus. And that is what makes Greece so interesting, because you know that India today is the biggest defense supplier to Armenia. Okay, and Armenia. So it's not just defense industry. We have genuine stakes in the reason in the region, because Turkey supports Pakistan against us, and this is what we also saw in the latest standoff that we had with Pakistan, which was called Operation Sindoor, which followed after a terrorist attack on India, which was an unprecedented terrorist attack on India that killed 27 tourists. So coming back, India has genuine stakes in the region, especially in your region, not only because India is looking at connecting Indo-Pacific with Indo-Mediterranean, which is a different part of what I'm saying, but taking the conversation back to security, India has genuine interests in aligning its foreign policy and aligning its strategic postures with countries like Cyprus and Greece against Turkey, because Turkey is really ruffling feathers in India's own backyard. Today, India's biggest challenges, which are Pakistan and Bangladesh, are not only propped up by China, but the second biggest defense supplier to both these countries is Turkey. Turkey is also sort of, encircling India in its own backyard by developing cooperation with a lot of Indian Ocean region states, while at the same time blacklisting India from any defense cooperation. So it is not a benign benign environment that we have in the Indo-Pacific or in the Indian Ocean region today. And we also balance that, and we balance that by aligning our strategic posturing with countries like Greece. Also, I'm sure you would be happy to know that while India is Armenia's #1 defense supplier today, we are selling a lot of advanced platforms to Armenia. We are also in advanced talks with France, because France is Armenia's #2 defense supplier. So the idea that I'm trying to explore is that, can we make something like a security quadrilateral between France, Greece, Armenia, and India, so that a stable military preparedness could be ensured while all these countries, like France, India, and Greece could co-produce, because we have extensive discussions going on in that field. So that is a bit of that is very much a game changer. India never really did that earlier. And by doing that, India doesn't only sort of, fulfill the Ministry of Defense's aspiration to emerge as a net defense supplier, not only a net defense importer, which we were all this while, but also play a very solid role in Europe's military preparedness. And I'm just giving you one example. I mean, I can give you so many examples that India is doing with others, but also I think really put this link between the Indo-Pacific and the Indo-Mediterranean, because just as South Korea is playing a huge role in your security and defense modernization, Israel is playing a very important role in your security and defense modernization. So can India, because India has extensive ties with both, South Korea or Israel. So why not co-produce? And I think recently, when Prime Minister went to Cyprus as well, the most of the discussions on defense should be about defense cooperation. Most of it is still not out in the public domain, but because I work on it, so I can totally tell you what the contours of it look like. I mean, we should be talking more about, for example, the Israeli systems that we use, Israeli systems that Cyprus uses, and why not co-build and try to bring down the cost, and make use of what the common procurement transformation is happening within the European Union. So today, India and Europe are having conversations which are very new, and defense is one. The second most important cooperation that I have to mention, of course, is the maritime security cooperation that is unfolding in the larger Indo-Pacific, where, as you know, I mean, it's both. I mean, it's happening at the EU-wide level. So it is on hybrid threats, it is on disinformation, it is on, those kind of things, security of critical infrastructure, maritime domain awareness, but also bilaterally. Okay, so we are also doing that. And I think the real framework out there is basically the Indo-Pacific strategies that the EU has, and also the different member states now have, and that's important. The third pillar would be connectivity, because we are looking at IMEC. As you know, IMEC came out from India's G20 presidency, which is India, Middle East, Europe Economic Corridor. Right now, there is a lot of trouble there because the Middle Eastern region is up in flames. As you know, there is, unending wars happening there between Israel and, Iran and the proxies, etc. But in my writings, I've argued that basically India has to develop more strategic gateways into Europe, because if you look at our combined trade, the trade is already reaching about $200 billion in both goods and services. So it is only natural that India would want to tap into, the markets that are not explored properly, because all of India's exports go to Europe only via 3 ports, and all those 3 ports are in the western side. They are Antwerp in Germany, Rotterdam in the Netherlands, and Hamburg in Germany. So Hamburg, Rotterdam, and Antwerp. These are the 3 ports by which India's trade is actually reaching Europe. But now, when you look at why Prime Minister is going to Marseille in France, why our Prime Minister is interested in Trieste in Italy. There is so much talk of Piraeus being that point, although in my writings I've argued that there's no point focusing on Piraeus because it's completely dominated by China. So it makes more sense to focus on Thessaloniki. Actually, that's my argument. So if you look at all this, you will see that India is trying to push for better connectivity, not by just one route, but by multiple strategic gateways into Europe. And India's presence in the Caucasus, India's presence in the Balkans, India's presence in the Nordics, for example, all of this actually helps and supports, these strategic gateways. So the time for that is right. I mean, we have excellent ties with most European countries. It's just that we never really explored that earlier. So when your Prime Minister Mitsotakis, came to India a couple of years ago, when he was chief guest at the Raisina Dialogue, I wrote, an op-ed, and I said that Prime Minister Modi has done for India-Greece ties what others couldn't do in 40 years. We couldn't really explore the potential of how deep the ties can go. So long and short, this is that today with Europe, we are no longer looking at Europe only as a developmental partner. Of course, all that stays. But Europe today is a strategic actor. Europe today is modernizing in a way which is unprecedented, that we have not seen after the Second World War, frankly. My argument is that India has genuine stakes, and I see lot of potential. Already a lot of things have happened that nobody could have imagined 2 years, 3 years ago. So Europe is a stable actor today. Third, India is looking at developing connectivity because the trade is going. And therefore, in the larger sense, you will see that India has stakes in also connecting the Indo-Pacific to the Indo-Mediterranean, because you have a great relationship with Japan, you have a great relationship with South Korea. So why not India? We have to create these synergies. And that's what India's foreign policy is also all about, that we build collaborative frameworks.
Professor Rao, thank you so much for this discussion. You made a very clear picture about what is happening now, what is happening between India and the European Union, India's position in the world, in the new world order. And we're looking forward to welcoming you in ancient Olympia in a few days' time. Thank you so much again.
Well, thank you. It's an honor to speak to you. I didn't really talk about the challenges so much, but that's something that I leave for the summer school then, right? So there are challenges that we have to.
And what the young be the biggest challenges for the young leaders?
It's great to have this conversation. Looking forward to seeing you soon. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
You're welcome.